Professor Howard Williams takes you on a journey through time and space, exploring death and memory, past and present. Archaeodeath.
So what do we learn about the other planets in Andor Series 2? It's Archaeology Professor Howard Williams here, back for a fifth video exploring from the perspective of archaeology the representation of this fictional science fiction universe in a galaxy from a long time ago, far away, in this Andor series that shows the development of the Rebel Alliance and the resistance to the Galactic Empire. And in previous videos we have focused on, in order, the Coruscant, home capital planet of the galaxy, with its complex architecture, miles deep and covering the entire planet's surface. We've then talked about Chandrila, this privileged, idyllic, tranquil world of bankers and merchants who are doing well out of the Empire, but where resistance is also being fostered. And then we have Ghorman, the textile producing planet that is the focus of imperial oppression and extraction, and where the rebels, the Ghorman front, are fighting to resist, that ultimately leads to their destruction as a planet and a people. And fourthly, we looked at the archaeology of the rebel moon of Yavin 4, where their base is established hidden in plain sight within the great temple of the Masisi, or the Masasi, who are an ancient culture we know very little about, and who that very anonymity, that unknowable ancient past, creates a mystical aura and a sense of deep time pastness for the Star Wars universe, as well as providing the sort of the foreshadowing of the Rebel Alliance. As the show progresses, we see the development of the base and its logistics and many of the aesthetics that we're familiar with, and drawing on the Mayan temples of Tikal, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and a very distinctive set of archaeological monuments as inspiration. They adapt those, and in so doing it creates a sense of pastness for the universe, but also a sense of nostalgia for the original 1977 film, A New Hope, and of course the Rogue One prequel, of which this season is a prequel to that prequel. So you get that sense of the past is operating and being used in many different ways to articulate the complexity of species, worlds and planets that are and cultures that are involved in this tension between imperial oppression and resistance. And I think that world building is so absolutely key to the series and makes it so successful. So while this may not be archaeology in the way it's popularly understood, by looking at it with an archaeological lens, thinking about the way the landscapes of these different worlds are represented, we help to understand how the costumes, material culture, the buildings, the architecture, the monuments, the landscapes are not simply backdrop, they actively inform the development of the storyline. And this is done when you see videos and interviews with the producers and those involved. This is very much a conscious choice to draw on not only earthly real world past, but also to create this extraterrestrial aesthetics of the past are so important in science fiction more broadly and in the Star Wars universe. This is nothing new or special for Star Wars, but it does reflect a broader tradition that in science fiction about futuristic worlds we're often drawing on the distant past. So there's a lot of archaeology in these shows, and of all the Star Wars universes, there's a lot in the Acolyte, which is set before the Star Wars the main sort of sequence of action. In Ahsoka, which is set afterwards, The Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett I've addressed, as well as some of the films, but also in Andor. Now, in the rest of the series, as well as those key core planets, there are various other worlds beyond Coruscant, Chandrila and Ghorman and Yavin 4, where their material culture is absolutely key to understanding the nature of this Star Wars universe. So the first of these is Sienna, or Sinar 73, and this is an eerie ice world where there is no demonstrated archaeological activity. This is like in Antarctica, if you want to, a Siberian tundra landscape at best, by way of analogy from our world. The idea is that this company is picking hundreds of worlds to conduct experiments for new military tech, and so CNR 73 is simply the 73rd world that this company, who make the TIE fighters for the Empire, have bases. And that shows in itself that icy wasteland and the presence of military installations for testing is very much an absolutely essential backdrop to Cold War and ongoing major military powers, and how they pick isolated places for military testing, be it the deserts of Nevada or the wastes of Siberia or Pacific atolls. This fits that model of sort of isolated places for testing experimental tech and mech and militaria. So it material. So it fits into that model, even though of course it's a complete isolated. There's no archaeology. But it does speak of isolated places specifically picked for their use for experiments, and in that sense I think it's a very interesting reflection on our world. So in that regard, it's very much like the antithesis of Yavin 4, that the rebels are building a base in the vastness of the galaxy on a moon amidst monuments. Here we're looking at wasteland use for military technology being tested. And this theme is continued with this location called the Malthine Divide, which appears as a meeting place equivalent to a Nazi hideaway or the Eagle's Nest in a mountain range. We don't know if the Malthine Divide is the name of the mountain range or of the planet, but the idea is of a medieval past, an ancient structure. It could be a Jedi temple, or it could be some other ancient culture that's used as a meeting place by director Orson Krennic for the secret plan to extract resources from various planets, in particular the plan for Ghorman to get the calcite out of their landscape. So this is a very sinister, secretive, but also ancient dwelling used in this implausibly dramatic scenery to provide a sort of a place where the secret meeting takes place. The details of the room are revealing, because as well as we talked about in the Ghorman episode, the newsreel being shown, that sort of retro mid-20th century aesthetic for the Empire as fascist, as Nazi basically, but also you've got this idea that they're operating in a room with this alien architecture and this mural that seems to show blind hunters riding horses, hunting some kind of beast with dogs. The dogs in question are the massifs that we see used by the Tusken Raiders. So we don't get a clear sense of this, but I think the idea I gain is that this could be another one of many ancient lost cultures that sit around the galaxy that we're not supposed to know about. We're supposed to only have allusions to, and that unknowing, that mystery, creates the aesthetic of deep time pastness that Star Wars is trying to create. That this is and also, as I said in the previous video, that obliviousness to the past, that lack of paying attention to the lessons of the past, that the Empire is interested in scraping the past clean. They're using it as simply loot and aesthetic, but they don't want to engage with the past. And frankly, also, the Rebel Alliance seem to have very little knowledge or engagement with the past either. This is despite the allusions to archaeology, this is very much a world, a universe without any archaeologist or history or deep time understanding of the lessons of the past, the significance of the past. And that's the uneasy tension at play here. So from icy wastes to sinister eyries in the mountains where secret plans are forged, we also have a brief rendezvous between Luthen Rael and Cassian Andor at Port Steergard, and this sort of industrial complex, the sense of we learn is the home of training of the Imperial Navy. We get that sense of another industrialized planet exploited and used for military activities by the Empire. and we also get a sense of Andor and Rael sort of working within this landscape of trade routes, of hyperspace lanes that connect up this very complex galaxy. And therefore, while it only briefly appears in one scene, it's doing an important task of adding depth and breadth to the complexity of the Empire and the world in which these characters are operating in. And then we have the Outer Rim world of Mina Rao. Now this is actually a major focus of the first 3 episodes, where we find that Andor and Wilmon, Brasso and Bix are in this agricultural planet that's almost been fully optimized for the extraction of grains, and you see only the pinnacles of rock are forested, with settlements clinging to the cliffs in the areas that are not to do with agricultural processing. All of the plains are completely turned over to agricultural production, and this gives us a sense, complementing Coruscant and Chandrila and Ghorman, of the vast majority of planets are either wastelands and focuses of exploitation and mining, or they are focuses of agricultural communities, entire planets subject to imperial audit, who are driven to produce for these other worlds. So these are the service planets, the serf planets, if you like, the underlings who are this agribiz production of food for others, for other planets, for off-worlders. And you get this sense of xenophobia. They don't like the mechs. Brasso, Bix, Wilmon and Cassian are treated with suspicion by the locals. There's tensions there that feed into when the Imperial troops begin their audit. We get that sense of tension. But what's the archaeological aspects here are, I suppose, this optimization of landscape, and yet still there is cultural expression in terms of the agricultural communities, isolated, dispersed, but still exploiting the landscape, and temporary dwellings where the mechs live out amongst the agricultural community. You have the giant silos that are used to store the grain, and even those are raised off the ground surface, presumably so they don't interfere with optimizing the use of the ground for. This is very much the American Midwest, or parts of Ukraine and Russia. This bread baskets of the world that are producing massive amounts of food, so important for the Empire, but looked down upon and controlled and audited. But this is also a landscape of hope in the storyline of the Empire. This out of the way, one of so many planets that are exploited by the Republic and then the Empire for the galaxy-wide societies. This is where Bix and her child can find peace and at least anonymity as the rebellion builds and conflict goes on. She gets out, and so we're given a hopeful story end for her in this landscape. And the one fact I picked up that's really interesting is they actually filmed they planted ancient rye for filming purposes near Watlington in Oxfordshire to create this sense of a deep time historical agrarian economy. Albeit on an alien world, it's a landscape that speaks of a deep time human connection with agriculture that goes back 10 millennia. So you get that sense of there is escape. The past offers solace, or past as in more simple, even though it's heavily mechanized, a simplified lifestyle of community, droids and people living in small groups, offers some kind of solace, if not full harmony, in the embroiled ongoing conflict and exploitation of the galaxy. So I think this is the past as comfort, or not necessarily a nostalgia, but a comfort, given the many brutal and violent aspects of the past that we see embodied in the Star Wars universe and its material culture and architecture and landscapes. The other aspect of resistance that we see, as well as Yavin 4, is we find other rebel groups operating in the hidden spaces, reoccupying old spaces. Rather disturbingly, this was filmed at Greenham Common. This is a model of Saw Gerrera's base on Dakar, which is also the filming location we see in the sequel films as a site where Princess Leia Organa's troops fight against, as the resistance against the First Order. So here we have a connection again. This is foreshadowing the later films, what will happen with the rise of the First Order and the conflicts that surround the galaxy then. But Saw Gerrera is rather paranoid and rather, belligerent partisan group, sort of operate in separate from the Rebel Alliance, and move from Dakar and to other places. We don't get a name for this location, where they seem to be preparing for an attack on another Imperial installation. And then, of course, foreshadowing Rogue One, we see Saw, despite denying it, on Jeddah, picking off Imperial targets as the Empire attempts to extract Kyber crystals from the Jedi Temple there. Now, there's other short, brief references to other planets that I think are really important, such as this wonderful scene, and this is all to do with the backstory of how Claire and Luthen build their resistance, their Axis network, from becoming a connected. Luthen is shown as a sergeant in the Imperial forces conducting massacres. He escapes and defects, or should we say deserts, and takes Claire, a child who is a survivor of one of their massacres, with her on a planet that we don't get to see. There's 4 planets. Then there's a second planet where Luthen and his Claire he adopts as a daughter, and they're seen trying to develop their antiquities trade. And then 2 planets where we do get to see something of the landscape. So here, filmed in at Zativa Castle in Valencia, Spain, where we have these 2 twin fortresses. They've turned it and adapted it into almost a great wall, like a linear barrier of some ancient conflict, but a medieval aesthetic here, obviously, because it is medieval, but they've adapted it to give this sense of simpler folk with markets, and but under the oppression of military forces. We see a public execution in chains. This could be very much out of a movie featuring ancient Rome as much as anywhere else, or Nazi Germany occupying France, or Greece, or Italy, or anywhere else. It very much gives that or fascists in Spain. It gives that sort of mid 20th century aesthetic, as well as the medieval past hanging heavy over their actions. So you get that sort of deep time antiquity alluded to, but again, never revealed. And then in the final of the 4 planets we see in their backstory, we see Claire taught about the acts of terrorism on this quasi-medieval bridge, very much a North Italian aesthetic, or an Alpine aesthetic. You see them conduct an attack while sitting in civil company and well dressed. They've acquired wealth, they've acquired privilege, they're operating in those upper echelon circles, they're at a lavish restaurant or cafe, and yet they are simultaneously blowing up Imperial forces on patrol, but set in this idyllic setting. And that idyllic setting tells you of the many worlds oppressed by the Empire, but still operating within that oppression, where the terrorists are having to make their grim choices of how to conduct their resistance. So over 5 videos I've taken you on a journey through the many ways in which the past, both earthly past and constructed alien pasts, are an important feature of Andor Season 2, from Coruscant, Chandrila, Ghorman, Yavin 4, and now a variety of other planets that only appear briefly and don't seem to have much archaeology, but the way they represent their material world is absolutely integral to how the storyline plays out. Now, I don't have any specific closing thoughts here. I will be developing those for a future lecture, which I'll be sharing in various conferences and workshops, but I thought by sharing these snippets together it would give you some insights and spark some of your own thinking, and I'd love to hear your own views about the Star Wars universe, its use of the past, the kind of past that's being represented. At one level, it's a very dissonant and disturbing and dark world of the galaxy. It's not a pleasant place, even if there's beautiful architecture and striking and unusual and exotic vistas and customs and clothing. The idea you get is one of a galaxy that's at war with itself and unsure of its past and very disconnected from its history, despite the ruins and relics that surround it.
Follow Archaeodeath on WordPress, or you'll never learn.